adding a third crop to your rotation, uh, and getting a good sense of what that marketplace looks like, and kind of new developments on the horizon as well. Um, so we've got Lydia English from Practical Farmers of Iowa that's going to give us a really excellent 1,000-foot view of kind of what their efforts in creating markets for small grains has looked like, and kind of giving a survey there. And then we've got Beth Stebbins from Grain Millers to give us some kind of practical nuts and bolts about how one accesses their milling market for oats specifically, but I think she may mention a couple other grains as well. So just as a reminder, we definitely encourage questions. There's been a lot of great conversation already. Please, as they come up, type your questions into the chat bar below, and make sure you assign your question to everyone so we can all see the conversation. And in certain cases where we don't have enough time, we'll try to get your questions answered offline if at all possible. So with that, I'll hand things over to Lydia.
Thanks, Matt. Get my screen set up. Okay, does that look okay?
Yeah, looks good. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you again, Matt and the whole team at Albert Lea Seed. I have enjoyed listening to all the talks this morning, so I'm really appreciative to be able to speak as part of the Small Grains Conference. Again, I'm Lydia English. I'm the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator with Practical Farmers of Iowa. And I'm not sure I should admit this or not, but I'm not an expert on small grains markets by any means, but I'm hoping today to share some of the things that I do know, and to also talk about what PFI is doing in this space. And then I encourage everyone who's participating to sort of share their experiences, perhaps with marketing, in the chat box, to sort of foster some discussion there. But before I delve into it, I do just want to give a little spiel about PFI in case there's those of you who aren't familiar with us as an organization. Mac mentioned some kind words about us earlier this morning, but I just wanted to orient everyone to the work that we do. So Practical Farmers of Iowa was started in the 1980s, really born out of the farm crisis there, and a group of farmers came together to share information with each other and to conduct on-farm research trials to test whether they could do things like lower their inputs or tweak their production practices and maintain profitability. And we have certainly grown over the years since 1985, but really that farmers being at the center of that knowledge exchange and that on-farm research continues to be our bread and butter as an organization. But I will say that, as we've grown and continued to build communities of practice around things like cover crops or small grain production, for instance, we've continued to realize that in order to have those sorts of practices be like built in to our farming operations, be sort of intrinsic to everyone's farms across the Midwest, we really need to work on developing markets for more farmers to both adopt, but then also successfully produce things like oats in Iowa, for instance. And so that's where my team comes in. I work on the strategic initiatives team at Iowa, and we are constantly drumming up ways that we can create a more favorable environment, so to speak, to have farmers adopt practices like diversified cropping systems with a small grain. And so that brings us back to markets. I'm going to state the obvious here, but we lack robust markets and infrastructure for small grain production. And it's hard to get people to grow something if they have no place or not a lot of options for selling it. It's also hard, I would say, to get sort of some of the larger companies that might have a pretty good market signal to buy things if there aren't a lot of people already growing them. So when we're in this space of trying to develop new markets for things like small grains, it often feels like a chicken and the egg situation where we don't really know exactly who's going to move first, but we need movement on both sides. I think for the purpose of today, though, and talking to you all and going through markets, again, at sort of a 1,000-foot space, it's simplest to walk through sort of the three main options, which have already been stated somewhat today for grain itself. And that's going to be food and milling, livestock feed, and cover crop seed. A couple things that I won't be covering today, and that's going to be first, milling and direct marketing small grains. So these are sort of those cottage milling industries where farmers are growing and processing and milling things like flour and then selling those directly to consumers. And those operations are wonderful, and we need more of those for sure, but I'm just not going to be talking about that sort of marketing today. And I'm hoping maybe the last presentation today, Steve and John might be able to touch on that a little bit. I'm also not really going to be talking about marketing hay or haylage. I know earliest in the day, Max said that this doesn't really get enough love, and so unfortunately, I'm not going to be giving it more love in this presentation either. It's certainly an important component of growing small grains, but I'm sort of focusing on getting the crop to the grain and then what to do after that. And again, this has been brought up earlier today, but I think it bears repeating. It's good to know what market you can target before the growing season begins. And that's for a couple reasons. As Mac already mentioned, like what market you're growing for is going to impact things like your variety selection. It could impact some things like management. But it's also good to sort of have an idea.
Doing good now if you want to talk.
Oops. It would also, it's good to sort of have that security and maybe even contract in advance of the growing season. So, so that you're in a good place. I think that will set you up.
Just a minute ago.
Sorry, Lydia, we're getting a little back talk here. We'll try to.
No worries.
We'll try to find we're going to mute everybody and then I will unmute you again. My bad.
It's no problem at all. This is always the joys of virtual conferences, so no problem. But okay, so I'm not gonna say much about the food and milling markets because Beth is really gonna go into that and delve into that a lot more in her presentation. But just again, sort of a list of some of the major options that we at least work with. This is not an exhaustive list, but grain millers. We love working with grain millers, and I'll let Beth talk more about what they do and what they buy. Further east for a wheat milling option, ADM opened a processing facility, I think in 2019, so fairly recently, and they take soft red winter wheat by truck. That's the easiest wheat for them to take logistically, and that is a conventional market, so they'll buy organic soft red winter wheat, but not at an organic price. Again, just want to touch on brewing and distilling markets because these often generate a lot of excitement, and I definitely don't want to like burst anyone's bubble with them because local breweries and distilleries should absolutely buy local small grains. But as was sort of hinted at this morning, oftentimes the craft breweries or craft distilleries that might be popping up in your neck of the woods don't need a large volume of small grains per year. So an estimate from some of the places that we've talked to in the past is that, typically a smaller scale craft brewery or distillery might only need like 20 to 25 acres of grain a year, which is something. Absolutely, and is part of the general market landscape. But, is that enough to move the needle? Maybe not, unless we get a ton more craft breweries and distilleries, which maybe would be a good thing anyway. And then lastly, we don't work a lot with some of the more larger wheat markets further south in Kansas City than where I'm in Ames or further north in Minneapolis, but they do exist, and there's also, both food and feed wheat markets sort of along the rivers on either side of Iowa. And then lastly, this is sort of a dig, I guess, but there are other processors in Iowa for oats especially, but right now, unlike grain millers, they aren't taking domestic products. So that's just one more thing that we are trying to do as an organization, is sort of try and maybe pressure those processors to start buying oats domestically and create that market pull. Okay, but that's all I want to say about food and milling. Moving on to growing small grains as livestock feed. Again, some of the key specs that you might want to think about if you want to target this market is definitely yield, as Mac mentioned this morning. And I did put test weight here. Again, that threshold of what's acceptable for test weight is often lower than it would be in a milling market, but having a high test weight is still going to be desirable for a lot of these feed markets. And then again, making sure that you're cognizant, especially if you're growing something like wheat for feed, that you have low VOM or DON levels. Again, this is a byproduct of scab or fusarium head blight, and it can be addressed by blending grains, but loads can also be rejected if they have too high a level of this. In our experience as an organization, bids for feed markets aren't always, widely shared or advertised. We have found that if elevators are mixing and selling cattle feed, they may be buying some oats. So in general, it is sort of more legwork on the farmer. You might have to just be calling around and seeing if any of your local elevators could buy something like oats or small grains, but it might not be widely advertised. In terms of, which grains should I grow if I'm targeting a feed market? Any of them, all of them can be fed to livestock. I would say, again, in our experience working with some of these larger companies, things like wheat and barley and rye are more attractive to them because those small grains just intrinsically are heavier. They have a higher test weight. And so when those companies are thinking about like pounds in of feed and then pounds out of feed, they want something like a wheat or a barley or a rye. But oats should get love in livestock feed as well. They are lighter, and so they, need more volume for the same poundage. But oats are really great and are high in fiber and good for gut health and just overall good for animal health. So we are pushing companies to also feed oats to hogs and cattle as well. This is an infographic that PFI put together just a couple years ago based on existing literature. And this is showing how much corn in a livestock ration can be replaced with a small grain while maintaining performance. And so for cattle on the top there, that's going to be the non-forage portion of their ration. And then for pigs and poultry, those are the maximum percentage of their diet that can be composed of small grains. And I don't want you to get distracted by all the percentages because those can certainly change as we do more feeding trials. And this doesn't incorporate the great work that Molly and Becca are doing feeding hybrid rye. But I put this up there again to exemplify that we can feed small grains to livestock and we can feed all of them to livestock. And so there really should be markets for all of the small grains as livestock feed. And I really think, as Matt said, this is where we can move the needle a lot. Once again, finding a feed market might just take calling around to some of your local elevators. One that we're working with at PFI is Smithfield Grain, and specifically their location down in Davis City, Iowa, which is away southern Iowa near Missouri. So they are buying both oats and wheat, and I've just listed a couple of their specs here. So you can see that test weight does matter to them. They have, the threshold of what they'll accept is going to be lower than perhaps milling, but they do want oats that are, hopefully at least 33 pounds per bushel and wheat that's at least 50 pounds per bushel. But I just wanted to throw that up there. And then they do have discounts if you don't have your oats or your wheats at sort of that gold standard for test weight, but those discounts aren't actually very steep. So they're pretty reasonable. And then the last thing I want to mention generally in terms of growing and marketing small grains for feed is straw, which we have already touched upon today. But for some farmers, having straw is more important than having the grain. So it's certainly a component of marketing your small grain. And I would say that straw profits can be really great, but it is sort of depend on who you're selling to and if you're doing that work yourself or if you're hiring someone to do your custom baling. In general, I would say that it seems like you're going to get a higher price if you're selling your straw directly to someone else if you're selling it off farm than if you're selling it to an aggregator. But again, when you're doing those direct sales, that might involve some more logistics and time. So it's sort of up to you to figure out what's going to work. And then I also want to make sure that I mention, because it is really important that if some people don't like to remove straw from their small grain because you are removing nutrients and organic matter, and so it costs money to replace those. And so when you're sort of penciling out whether the straw market is right for you, it's good to think about, how much is it going to cost for me to apply P&K, for instance, to replace the value of that in the straw. So again, something to just consider as you're thinking about markets for straw. Okay, and the last sort of general market I want to talk about is this cover crop seed market, which is really exciting and definitely growing here in Iowa. I put the key specification here as germination, and certainly there are lots of things that can factor into that, but really when you're growing cover crop seed, people don't want to buy seed that isn't going to germinate or grow on their own farm. So that's really sort of the thing that's gonna matter. I would say that if you're interested in getting into this, a good place to start is to just start growing your own cover crop seed for your farm. If you're already using things like oats or rye for cover crop seed, why not set aside 10, 20 acres and try growing it yourself? As Max said, most of the varieties that you're using can be planted on your own farm, replanted on your own farm. So I think that's a really nice place, especially for someone who might not have a market for small grains or is, just starting to grow them for the first time to begin. If you want to sell your seed off farm, again, you can either directly market that maybe to your neighbors, or you could sell that seed to like a seed house or a distributor. And I've listed some of them here. Talking with other folks that are sort of starting smaller scale cover crop seed businesses, a lot of times if they're selling the seed to their neighbors, they're also coupling that with like custom drilling. And so then they become sort of that one-stop shop for their neighbors in terms of fall cover crop application. So just something to consider when you're thinking about starting to grow cover crop seed and maybe selling that locally in your neighborhood. And I've put in italics down there, again, to make sure that you are paying attention to rules and regulations when you are going to be selling seed off the farm. And I will come back to that in just a second. But first, I just wanted to show that we often hear from folks that Iowa grown rye has pretty poor germination. And so when they're sourcing cover crop seed, they find that it's best if they just source something from the Dakotas, for instance. And while I don't want to discount anyone's experience with that, this past year in PFI's rye variety trials, which we coordinate in conjunction with Iowa State University, we had Iowa State send samples of all of the non-hybrid varieties to their seed lab to do germ testing. And so that's what I'm showing you here. So we had 6 varieties that we tested for germ across 3 sites, Kanawha, Charles City, and Nashua. And those are sort of in the northern, northeastern part of the state. And you can see that our rye germ ranged from 87 to 97%, which is fairly good, I would say. And some of these lower sampled, or the ones that had sort of a lower germ, also were the samples that had some fungal abnormalities present. So again, having disease isn't going to be great for germ, and it's something to think about when you're managing a crop for cover crop seed. We will be continuing to do these rye variety trials, and we've expanded them in 2021 to 4 Iowa State research farms. And so hopefully we'll continue to get some germination data and can share that out with everyone in our network.
Hey, Lydia. Mac just wanted to give a quick spiel on rye germination, if that's okay.
Please.
Hey, Lydia, thanks for the great presentation. We also get questions from people on, the germination of rye and how their experience is that rye grown in such and such an area doesn't have as good a germ. And I would heartily agree with you. I don't know that the area matters as much as people think it does. I think the main factor is that people underestimate how long it takes for rye to get dry. So since rye heads out so early and starts to turn brown, people think, oh, I can take this rye for seed right now because it looks dead ripe. And then when they combine it, they find out, oh, wait, it's 16.5% moisture. And then now they've got a problem, and all of a sudden their rye has a 72% germ or an 83% germ or something. So if you're not, I would strongly recommend windrowing rye if you're going to take it for seed. And I know you're going to talk about intellectual property in a minute, so I won't go into that. But just again, the moisture of the grain at which you harvest your rye is going to be a huge determinant on the final germination.
Great, thanks, Mac. I appreciate that interjection. That's really great. So yeah, grow Iowa grown rye is really the main, I think, takeaway. I think. But yes, I do want to get back to intellectual property laws, and Mac talked about this a little bit this morning, so I don't want to reiterate exactly what he said. And I also don't have time to go into all of the seed laws, but I do just want to touch upon this so that everyone's aware of the landscape. I had a presenter at our conference a couple weeks ago who owns a cover crop business say that he felt like Iowa was the Wild West in terms of cover crop seed sales. And that's, I think what he meant when he said that was just that, sometimes clear cut information is lacking, or things aren't always like super transparent and available for folks. So they don't exactly know what they're supposed to be doing. And depending on what variety they're trying to sell off farm. And so while I can't get into everything, I do just want to show this flow chart, which should hopefully help a little bit in clarifying sort of the basic things that you need to be aware of if you're trying to sell cover crop seed off your farm. And really a lot of it depends on the variety that you have and how much restrictions there is depending on sort of the proprietary nature of that variety. So if we look all the way on the left here, if you want to sell a variety that is licensed or patented off farm, really that what you're able to do is going to be dictated by the individual or the company that holds the rights to that variety. And I know that Klaus just put in the chat box that hybrid ryes are not allowed to remember, that is not allowed to use hybrids to produce cover crop seeds. So just be aware that if you're growing a variety that's licensed or patented, to know, what the documentation says when you sort of sign that. Most of the varieties of the small grain varieties that are coming out of public breeding programs and universities are going to have this plant variety protection that Mac mentioned before. And so that again is intended to protect the intellectual property of the breeder in that variety, and then also fund future research so that we can get even more great small grain varieties released on the landscape. And I think most PVP varieties also have what's called Title V. And so what that means is that if you want to grow and sell a variety off farm, you need to be certified to do that. So you need to be certified to do that, and then the variety itself needs to be certified that it is the variety that you say it is. And so that basically just means you have to plan ahead. And so you're going to have to source foundation seed, and you're probably going to have someone come out and inspect your fields. It is doable, and I know people that do it, so don't be scared away. If you really want to grow and sell Dion oats, for instance, like, you can do it. It just is going to take some planning ahead, and maybe talking to some of your local government agencies. Varieties can also have PVP and then not have Title V, and my understanding is that, again, like, it's more, what you can do is more in line with what the owner of that variety says. And then lastly, sort of the simplest route is if a variety it doesn't have any sort of protection. And that's going to be most common with our older varieties, since PVP expires after most times expires after 20 years. So most varieties that were released before 2001 are not going to have PVP protection anymore. And so you don't need to go through any sort of certification to sell that seed off farm. You might notice, though, that no matter what route you take in terms of the restrictions are on that variety, you always must meet your state's labeling and permitting laws. And so this is going to vary state by state, but generally states are going to require that your seed is going to be tested and labeled for content like foreign matter and noxious weeds by a licensed lab. So in Iowa, I would say the easiest one is the ISU Seed Lab, although they might not be the only option. And then depending on where you're selling that seed, you might need a permit or a license as well. And I'm sorry, I haven't listed every state's contact. I've just listed the Iowa contact. And so if you have more questions about those sort of permit and labeling requirements, you can certainly reach out to Robin. And I do want to mention, because I don't think this has been mentioned yet, that oftentimes a question that we get is like, can I sell a PVP variety as VNS as a loophole sort of to this whole thing? And the answer is no. So VNS is intended to be a mixture of non-PVP related varieties. And so I think maybe Mac did mention this, but anyway, you can't sell Dion oats again under a VNS label. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is actually just a plug for PFI's small grain cost share. So we have been providing cost share to farmers to grow a small grain with a legume cover crop since 2017. This applies to farmers both in Iowa, but also in the surrounding states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. This year is the last year for Indiana and Ohio farmers, and we are offering $15 an acre up to 200 acres for a small grain with a legume cover crop. A couple of the other specs of the cost share are listed there. And so if you're interested in applying and getting funding for that, we still have some funds available. You can go to that link listed. And then the last thing I want to put on everyone's radar is, in addition to continuing this small grain cost share through at least, I believe, 2023, next year we're also piloting a cost share for farmers to sort of take credit from their legume cover crops. So we're piloting a cost share at $10 an acre to have farmers decrease the amount of fertilizer that they're using on corn that's following a legume cover crop. So more details of that to come, but I just want to put it on people's radar, sort of trying to help cost share the whole diversified rotation. In addition to our general cost share pool, most of that again coming from public funding, we also have some cost share that's directly tied to market opportunities. So most of these companies I've already mentioned today, but for instance, we work with grain millers and growers, some of them I think on this call, to grow oats for Oatly or for 7 Sundays. And then we also work with Pepsi through ADM to have growers grow wheat, mostly in the Illinois area. So we're trying to increase this list. Hopefully we have even more companies on board buying oats and small grains domestically, and then also helping with our cover crop cost share in the future. But this is the list of places that are sort of pioneering in this space, I would say. And so that's all I want to say before I hand it over to Beth. I just do want to thank the rest of the present and former strategic initiatives team at PFI. Most of the work that I've talked about, it's really their work, and I'm just sort of standing on their shoulders here. So kudos to them. And I also want to give credit to the Sustainable Food Lab, who's really helps with us in terms of engaging with these supply chain companies to help create more markets and infrastructure for small grains across the landscape. And if anyone has questions they want to ask me offline, I'll try and keep up with the chat box here, but please email me at that address, and we can keep in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lydia. I really appreciate your presentation and your contributions today. There was one question I think that would probably be best for you to answer here over while we still got you. Does a farmer need to be located in Iowa to qualify for the cost share program, or can they be from other states too?
Yeah, they can be from other states. This year, folks who qualify can be from Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio. So I'm sorry for any Missouri farmers or anything. There's no hate. That's just how the funding works.
Cool. And are you still taking signups right now, or how does that?
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat box.
Awesome. That's great. Well, yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate you being a part of this and for your presentation. And we're just going to plow right ahead here and get Beth online here. And it looks like she is already on, which is great. So Beth, you can share your screen whenever you are ready to go.
All right, we look good there. Maybe I need to screen this probably.
Yeah, I saw it for a moment there, but there you go.
Got a few monitors going on here, so that always complicates things. All right, good to go now.
Yeah, you might just have to start the show, I think.
Okay, hold on, I think it's sharing the wrong monitor. Let me try this again.
There you go. We got it now.
I might just need to look at a different monitor, but that's okay. All right, well, we can get going here. But yeah, thanks, Matt, for having us today. And also thank you to Lydia for the couple plugs there. I'm glad you guys enjoy working with us. But I'm Beth Stebbins from Grain Millers, and I'm here to talk about, well, you grew these small grains now. What do you do with them? So as I mentioned, I'm with Grain Millers. I'm based out of the Twin Cities. Formerly worked in wheat quality at Ardent Mills out in Denver, Colorado, and then most recently in grad school for cereal science at North Dakota State. But I've been at Grain Millers for about 3 years now, and I do conventional small grain procurement and run our sustainability program there. And now I can't, oh, there we go. Sorry guys, technical difficulties. Little background on Grain Millers. We're primarily an oat miller. We have 3 oat mills in St. Ansgar, Iowa, just south of the Minnesota-Iowa border, and then out in Eugene, Oregon, and then in the heart of oat country up in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. Then we also have a corn mill out in Marion, Indiana that does conventional, non-GMO, and organic corn. A flax mill out in Newton, Wisconsin, and then a couple of cleaning plants in St. Peter, Minnesota, and Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So a little bit more about grain millers. We are a private label food and ingredient company. So you may not recognize our name, but you've probably eaten some of our products. So we have a can line to can your regular rolled oats that you maybe buy store brand rolled oats from, say, Walmart, Target, Trader Joe's, that kind of thing. Ingredients for your Cliff Bars, different granola bars, flaked bread topping for Dave's Killer Breads, say, or what's really growing for us right now is oat milk. So we provide oats for Oatly to make into oat milk. So might not have heard of us, but our ingredients are pretty much everywhere, and most people have probably had them. Our closest mill to this area is in St. Ansgar, Iowa. It's only 43 miles away from Albert Lea. So it's just a great opportunity to get into the food grade market. We mill 6 different small grains there. So as I mentioned, mostly oats, but also hard red and soft white wheat, barley, rye, and a little bit of triticale. We do both organic and conventional grains there. So between the organic and conventional and the different types of grains, we bring in a lot of different commodities down there. We have 2 million bushels of storage capacity. So that's actually really neat. Our setup down there allows for a lot of different binning to do special runs of products for our customers, identity preserve projects, that sorts of things. So it gives a lot of unique opportunities to our farmers, which I can delve into a little bit later. And then we employ about 160 people down there. So a big employer in the area. So just from this slide, I'm going to address maybe what's a little bit different about selling to us at grain millers. A lot of farmers who work with us, they're maybe just getting into these food grade markets. They're used to selling corn or beans or maybe even wheat to their elevator, but selling to us is a little bit differently. So what you do first is set up a contract with us. So that could be this time of year for a harvest delivery or throughout the crop year, whenever. First thing to do is give myself or one of my colleagues a call to set your pricing and your delivery period. Then after that, what we need you to do is submit a sample. This becomes extremely important come harvest time, especially. Since we are a food grade facility, we are pretty stringent on our specs. So we like to see a sample from growers before we take delivery, and that will minimize chance of rejections, which will save you time and money, and then also saves time at the mill. And then also what we can do then, if we see you're a couple pounds off on test weight or a % or 2 on moisture, we can kind of give you some pointers on what you can do to bring your sample up to grade so that you're not bringing it to the sample to get rejected, or bring your grain to the mill just to get rejected and get sent home. So then once your sample is approved by our quality manager, you either will deliver it or we can arrange for pickup if you would rather us handle the freight. We can offer on-farm pricing. And at that, it's probably important to note at that if you're going to grow for us, it is important to have a storage plan after harvest. We don't allow anybody to bring in their oats or other grains straight from the field, and that's because we do need to do that sample approval, and that can take a couple of weeks. So even if it's just throwing it in your corn bin for a couple of weeks, that's something you need to think about before you write a contract with us. And then also oats will sweat and gain a couple of pounds over those 2 weeks. So it's also in your best interest to let it sweat so you can get the best test weight you can. So we hear a lot that you can't grow oats in Iowa. What are we doing growing oats in Iowa? That it's kind of a weird thing, but a lot of our customers do like that we purchase domestic oats and will request that we identity preserve domestic oats for them. And that's for a lot of reasons. I'm sure a lot of us know, consumers are starting to care more about where their food comes from. So consumers do like to hear that their oats are locally grown or grown in America. So that's important to a lot of people. There's benefits for soil health, not only for which benefits you as a farmer, but a lot of our customers like to tell that story to their consumers that their product is part of the solution to some of these problems we're seeing in agriculture. And then obviously shorter transit time. growing oats closer to the mill, it's a quicker trip to the mill, and that's provides a few benefits such as reduced emissions, which we're seeing in our with our customers is something that's becoming a big priority, that they want to tout that their products are low emission, low greenhouse gas emission. That's definitely something that's up and coming, and we're going to see a lot more of that. So a couple notes on growing oats. Obviously, if you want any more information on this, we have a whole pamphlet we can send you and have an agronomic team who can talk further about this, but just a few pointers to get started on growing oats. Variety selection is key. I have our recommended varieties map on screen, but we want to grow something that's going to be resistant to diseases and also is shown to provide good test weight for your region. And also, obviously, our friends at Albert Lea Seed will be able to tell you what's best for your region. But make sure you're kind of looking for varieties that will work well in your region and not just look at yield. We need to look at test weight as well. You want to plant as early as you can, hopefully by the end of March, but obviously that's depending on how the weather, which you can't control. Oats definitely like to have their feet cool, as we can see why they thrive in Canada. So the earlier you get them in, the earlier the grain fill period will be, and won't hopefully be in the heat of the summer. And that'll definitely help your test weight so that you can have the best test weight you can. And we also suggest not to plant back to back with other cereals. This isn't a make or break, but it can lead to issues in the disease cycle. So that can cause rust or other issues, which can affect your test weight. Another question I get a lot is, if I plant oats, do I have to swath them? Because a lot of people don't have the equipment to do that. You don't have to swath your oats. We have a lot of producers who have success straight cutting. But to straight cut, we recommend you target 14 to 15% moisture before you start doing that, and then to put it on air afterwards, so you make sure you have the proper moisture level. Something we often tell our growers is that when you think you're ready to combine your oats, go fishing for the weekend and then come back and start combining, just to give them a little more time to dry down. And then if you are interested in swathing, we recommend targeting 20 to 25% moisture, and then make sure they get down to 14% in the windrow before combining. And then last point, ensure proper moisture before storage. If you put it in the bin and it's too high moisture, you might end up with some toxin issues or some off smells, which we're very sensitive to, being a food grade facility. So some of those things can cause quality issues at the mill and could lead to rejection. Just a quick overview of our specs. Our test weight spec is 38 pounds. We will take down to 36 with a 20-cent discount, which if you've grown for us in the past, we have increased that discount a little bit this year, just because as we get below that 38 pounds, it does really negatively affect mill yield. So we've kind of increased those discounts as a way to encourage growers to think of oat as a cash crop and put in their best effort to make that 38-pound test weight. 13.5 is our spec on moisture, and we'll take up to 14% with a 5-cent discount, and then 20% max thins and 1 part per million on vomitoxin, but that is on the groat, not the whole kernel. So that usually isn't an issue for us to accept depending on the year. I would say 90% of the time, if we reject an oat sample or truck, it's because of test weight. So that's definitely the most challenging spec to hit. So a couple notes on the oat market. The projected Canadian end stocks are down 17% for 2021. And then on top of that, the Canadian oat industry is seeing increased interest in exports to South America. Down there, Chile is a major exporter of oats, and they're having a poor crop year this year. So they are going into Canada, into their old crop stocks to try to replace some of the oats they aren't getting out of Chile. So because of that, there's strong demand for old crop and new crop oats. So we're seeing some strong bids for new crop 2021. So currently for old crop, we have no bid nearby for old crop oats, just because we're pretty full. But if you do have some oats in the bin, our bid for April through June is $3.90 a bushel. I will say though, if that is of interest to you, I would get in touch sooner rather than later, as we probably will fill up on what we need. So I wouldn't wait around till April through June if you are interested and have some old crop to move. For new crop, we're at $3.50 a bushel for harvest through December. And then even more exciting, Jan through March, we're at $4 a bushel. So I haven't been doing this for too long, only 3 years or so, but that's the first time I've seen a 4 in front of a new crop oat bid. So it may not be as good as corn and bean prices right now, but the oat prices are definitely running a little bit. So it might be a good year to try a few acres of oats and see how they do for you.
Hey Beth, a couple of things. There's a question on the chat about what's the highest test weight on average for Iowa oats in a year in, year out scenario. Probably a hard question to answer in general terms, but
Yeah, I know we have some growers who are very practiced at growing oats for us, and they can consistently see over 40-pound oats. So it's doable.
mhm. Yeah, obviously kind of speaks back to some of those management considerations we were mentioning earlier about, planting date, managing for fertility and fungicides, as well as, some of that impact definitely is weather related as well. But
Yeah, for sure.
There was another question on organic oat bids. I don't know if that's something you're going to touch on a little bit, but
I do not have the organic oat bids. I can drop Richie's contact info in the chat, or I'm not sure if he's here, but I know some of those periods are filled up, but I'll drop Richie's contact info in the chat when we're done, and he's who to contact for organic bids.
great, thank you. And
Yep.
what factors do you see leading to the higher price of oats? Is that kind of following other crop prices, or is that mainly due to poor crops and kind of the non-US areas?
Yeah, I definitely say it's a second thing. It's the factors mainly in the Canadian markets, just that their oats are getting gobbled up by the southern hemisphere. And then actually up in Canada, they're kind of fighting the canola prices for acres. It's to what we have with corn and beans happening down here running. Up there, they have the canola markets, and I think flax too, which are kind of good alternatives. So we're just fighting for oat acres are fighting with those up there, leading to a little bit fewer plantings.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep. And then, so speaking on interesting markets, after oats on the conventional side, we probably bring in the most barley. So the barley markets have kind of been going crazy in the last few months for, again, some kind of global reasons. China is starting to rebuild its pig herd, which was recently decimated by African swine fever. So they're feeding a lot more barley than usual. And I learned today that they typically import their barley from Australia, but Australia has slapped an 80-something% tariff on Australian barley due to diplomatic issues. So because of that, China has gotten into the Canadian barley market. So they have really been running up the price and taking over the old and new crop barley bushels coming out of Canada. So it's definitely raising the price of barley. So if that's something you've been interested in, it might be a good year to get into that. And again, it's something that I've heard a lot that we don't grow barley in Iowa. It's kind of a weird thing to do, but every once in a while we do have some producers who have some luck doing it. So I would definitely recommend do your homework, but it could be a good year to give it a shot. Right now for new crop, we're probably about $5 bushel delivered on barley, if that's something you wanted to get it in on. But our specs for that, they're 46-pound test weight down to 44 with discount. 13.5 moisture, 3 ppm on vomitoxin. But again, if you're interested, get in touch and I can send you full specs on that. And then some of the other small grains we do take in, barley, as I just mentioned, soft white wheat, which we don't buy a lot from this area just because we don't necessarily see good quality around here. But if you grow it, definitely send us a sample, get in touch, and we'll take a look at it. We do hard red wheat and rye as well. Our usages on those are kind of decreasing in recent months just due to changes because of COVID. So what we'll likely do on those is look at samples come harvest time. So if you are growing those, get in touch this summer and we can discuss where markets are at then. And then we take in a couple truckloads a month of triticale. So if you just have some triticale looking for a home, we're a good place to at least check in with. And then just a few things to plug about why it's great to grow for us. We do have on-farm pricing available. So if you're a little bit far away from St. Ansgar or don't want to deal with trucking, what have you, we will offer you a picked up bid where we'll just take off our estimated freight cost from the bid and give you your final bid. And that's exactly what you'll get. And you don't have to worry about trucking. And we also have agronomic assistance available. We know that to a lot of people, growing oats may be new and we want you to be successful. So we have agronomists on staff who will come and help you pick out a variety. We can send an intern to you in the summer if you need to help scouting to determine if you need to apply a fungicide, that sort of thing. We'll do everything in our power to help you be successful. And then again, we have forward contracts available now so you can lock in your price, help out with some planning, know exactly what you're going to get. And our contracts do come with full active God clauses. So if you don't make grade, get hailed out, don't get the amount of bushels you expect, the contract will just be canceled. We'll never make you go out and find oats in the market or anything. So super flexible like that. And two, if you don't make grade for, say, test weight, we can oftentimes offer you a feed bid delivered to St. Ansgar. And a lot of times won't be any better than what you might be able to do locally. But if you don't have a local market, it's definitely a good option if you don't have anywhere else to send your oats. And then one last thing we like to tout is our sustainable grower program, which I run. So I'd like to give it a quick shout out. It's no cost to the grower and it leaves you with no obligation to sell to us, but it's entirely grower focused. We don't want to tell you how to farm. We want you to focus on improving your sustainability in a way that matters to you. So what it consists of is a yearly survey that you fill out this time of year. And just it only takes a couple hours and involves answering questions in 20 different areas of sustainability across your operation. And then once you finish that, your buyer will get in touch with your scores on it and you can kind of pick a couple different areas that are important to you to maybe focus on improving with some resources we can provide on how you can improve in those areas. And then kind of as a benefit we give to our growers in those programs are preferred contracting. So maybe some of those grains like hard red wheat and rye that we don't take a lot in and there's a lot of interest. We try to give those contracts to our sustainable growers as a way of appreciating them being the program. And then also, as I mentioned, St. Ansgar is really set up to do special projects and IP runs of grain. So when we do those with our customers, we tend to source those growers from our sustainable grower program. So for example, we have a really small pilot going on right now with a customer trying to source carbon negative oats. So what we did is we looked at our growers in our sustainable grower program and found growers with practices who were most likely to be carbon negative. And then we were able to offer those growers a contract with a premium attached to it. So it can be beneficial to growers as well, just because we can identify growers for these programs that can often pay a little extra. But that's just an overview of at least one food grade market that's available to you. My contact info is there and I will drop that in the chat as well and kind of stick around in case there's any other questions that I can address in the chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Beth. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
There was one question as kind of an overall portion of Grain Miller's business. Do you know what percent of what you're handling is organic versus conventional?
I couldn't say, to be honest. I will say organic was a big area of growth for a long time. And I think that's probably about evened out now. I know for a while we were struggling to source the organic bushels we've needed, but I think that market is kind of balanced out now that we can find everything we need out there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think there was a little bit of conversation, and Richie chimed in on the organic oat bid. For those who are not watching the chat, it's $5.50 a bushel delivered to St. Ansgar, May to July in 2022. So it's information on organic oat bids there.
Thanks, Richie.
Great. So we're gonna take a quick 5-minute break until we get started with our final presenters of the day.